Good evening, everyone, and Hag Sukkot Sameach. Happy Sukkot to everyone. I hope that you're all able to enjoy in one way or another the harvest and the joy that this part of our season represents. And we are because this Shabbat falls during the middle of Sukkot, we have a special Torah portion that we'll be reading that relates to the festival. So we're going to be reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 33. We're going to begin at verse 12, and we're going to read through chapter 34, verse 26. So with that, if you'd like to unmute, and we can say together our blessing for the opportunity of studying together Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Beginning with chapter 33 of the book of Exodus, verse 12, I'll share a couple of verses. I'll invite other people to read as well. And then I'll share with you a little bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for everyone to have the opportunity to share their responses to our reading as well. Moses said to Adonai, "See, you say to me, lead this people forward, but you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. Further, you have said, I have singled you out by name, and you have indeed gained my favor." Richard, would you like to read there, verse 13?
Thank you. Now, if I have truly gained your favor, pray let me know your ways, that I may know you and continue in your favor. Consider too that this nation is your people. And he said, I will go and lead and will lighten your burden. And he said to him, unless you go and lead, do not make us leave this place. For how shall it be known that your people have gained your favor unless you go with us, so that we may be distinguished, your people and I, from every people on the face of the earth.
Thank you. We're on verse 17. Sherry, would you like to read a little bit?
And the Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor, and I have singled you out by name.
And then Steve, would you like to read a little bit?
Thank you, Lord. He said, oh, let me behold your presence. And he answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name of the Lord and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show.
Thank you. And let me invite Dave Leb, would you like to read a little bit at verse 20?
But he said, you cannot see my face, for man may not see me and live. And the Lord said, see, there is a place near me. Station yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by.
Go ahead and finish that.
Then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen.
Thank you. And now we're at the beginning of chapter 34. Susan and David, would you like to read a little bit there?
Yes, thank you. And the Lord said to Moses, carve you 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I shall write on the tablets the words which were on the first tablets that you smashed. And be ready by morning, and you shall go up in the morning to Mount Sinai and take your stance for me there on the mountaintop.
And no man shall go up with you. And also let no man be seen in all the mountain. Also let the flock and the oxen not feed opposite that mountain. And he carved 2 tablets of stones like the first ones. And Moses got up early in the morning and went up to Mount Sinai as Hashem had commanded him. And he took in his hand 2 tablets of stone. And Hashem came down in a cloud and stood with him there. And he invoked the name Hashem. And Hashem passed in front of him and called.
And let me invite June. We're kind of in the middle now of verse 6 of chapter 34. Would you like to read a little bit there?
Yes. Thank you, Rabbi. The Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy unto the 1000th generation, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children, unto the 3rd and unto the 4th generation. And Moses made haste and bowed his head toward the earth and worshiped. And he said, if now I have found grace in thy sight, O Lord, let the Lord, I pray thee, go in the midst of us, for it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for thine inheritance.
Thank you so much, June. Let me invite Jim and Peggy. Would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 10?
Thank you, Rabbi. He said, I hereby make a covenant. Before all your people, I will work such wonders as have not been wrought on all the earth or in any nation, and all the people who are with you shall see how awesome are Adonai's deeds, which I will perform for you.
Mark well what I command you this day. I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Beware of making a covenant with the inhabitants of the land against which you are advancing, lest they be a snare in your midst. No, you must tear down their altars, smash their pillars, and cut down their sacred posts. For you must not worship any other God, because Adonai, whose name is impassioned, is an impassioned God.
Thank you, Jim. Let me invite Paul to read a little bit at verse 15.
I'm having troubles here. I'm on 34. I'm not reading what you're reading. So
Okay.
Will someone else go on?
Margot, we're at verse 15 of chapter 34.
You must not make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, for they will lust after their gods and sacrifice to their gods and invite you, and you will eat of their sacrifices. And when you take wives from among their daughters for your sons, their daughters will lust after their gods and will cause your sons to lust after their gods.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let me invite Robin, if you'd like to read there at verse 17.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. You shall not make molten gods for yourselves. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, eating unleavened bread for 7 days, as I've commanded you, at the set time of the month of Abib. For the month of Abib, you went forth from Egypt. Every first issue of the womb is mine. From all your livestock that drop a male as firstling, whether cattle or sheep. But the firstling of an ass you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck. And you must redeem every male firstborn among your children. None shall appear before me empty-handed.
Thank you so much. And Mark Levinstein, would you like to read at verse 21?
Thank you. 6 days you shall work, but on the 7th day you shall cease from labor. You shall cease from labor even at plowing time and harvest time. You shall observe the Feast of Weeks, the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the turn of the year. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the sovereign Lord, the God of Israel. I will drive out nations from your path and enlarge your territory. No one will covet your land when you go up to appear before the Lord your God 3 times a year.
Thank you so much. Jay, would you like to read as there at verse 25 and read 25 and 26?
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, and the sacrifice of the feast of Passover shall not be left lying until morning. The choice first fruits of your soil you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk.
Thank you very much. That's our portion for this Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot, the Shabbat that occurs during the intervening days of the festival of Sukkot. And I'd like to just share a little bit of a focus study with you, and happy to have all of us join in with some of our own reflections about what we've just read. If you have a study sheet, I invite you to take a look at the painting, which I've inserted there. It's a painting by an artist from Mexico, Eduardo Rodriguez Calzado, and a very dynamic painter. I encourage you to learn more about him, to go online and see more of his works and read what he has to say. One of the things that this artist talks about in terms of his own works is that he seeks to capture the harmony of the universe, which he sees as filled with vibrant colors and all kinds of geometric shapes, as well as dots and dashes, and tries to express both the emotions through what he says is a fragmentation of color, and also tries to have some human element in each of his paintings that are also in touch with another level of consciousness, if you. So one of the things that drew me to this painting for this week's Torah portion, this painting called Radiance. One of the things that I found fascinating, of course, first was this rich, vibrant red, which is just pulsating off the canvas itself. And then I looked closer, and what really intrigued me is that if you look towards the bottom of the canvas, you see very clear, delineated, rectilineal geometric shapes. And then as they go upward, though, as they become part of this combusting flame that's in the middle there, those rectilineal shapes, they begin to morph, and they become, they lose their linearity, if that's the right word, and they begin to develop more curves, and they begin to dissolve their rigidity. I think that's what interested me. They dissolve the rigidity of shape, and they go up into the atmosphere in a less than well-defined shape. So that's kind of what I want to explore in some of the verses that really caught my attention this week's Torah portion, is this notion about the tension between how we seek to live based here on earth with holding on to rather rigid forms, and then the notion that as we look upward, as we seek to access another dimension, the rigidity of those forms kind of gives way. So we're going to see how those dynamics that are in the painting, at least the ones that attracted me, are played out in the verses. So in number one is from our Torah portion from chapter 33, and it is Moses is pleading with God to get to know in some deeper way the very essence of who God is. So Moses says, "Oh, let me behold your presence." And God answered, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will call out the name Yud, He, Vav, He before you, and I will grant the grace that I will grant, and I will show the compassion that I will show. However, you cannot see my face, for a human being cannot see me and live." And Adonai said, "See, there is a place near me. Stand yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes by, I will place you in a cleft of the rock, and you will see my back. On one level, we can certainly understand Moses's yearnings, that Moses so far has been commissioned by this force of the universe to free the Israelite people, to lead them out of slavery, to lead them across the wilderness to a place of promise. And at this point in the early stage of this journey, Moses desperately wants to know, if you will, to access the inner dimension, the inner personality, the essence of God. And God's answer is, yes, of course, I'll share that with you. It's just that you won't see my face. You'll know me by knowing my back. That's how you'll know my goodness. So I thought about this, and I thought about, what is it about seeing someone's face that allows us to think we can know them better? And because when we see someone's face, we think that we can somehow know who they are. We can, if you will, capture a sense of who they are by looking at their face. And then I thought of some of the technology that we have today that seeks to do that for a variety of reasons. Facial recognition. That's how we now identify people, with this artificial intelligence that takes pictures of us and then can match them up with other photographs. And they say, oh yes, that's June. We've got this picture of her, and all these different points on the face match up, and this picture is the picture of June. Okay? To say that we look at someone frontally, and then we can identify them. We can have a definition of who that person is. We can then file that image away so that we can pull it up later and say, oh yes, I can identify that person because I confronted them in terms of their face. And God turns this around and says, yeah, but you can't do that with me. I am a force that defies capture. I am a force that defies definition. I am a force that defies being defined and captured and filed away. I am far more dynamic than that. How you will know me, God seems to be saying, is in my wake. You'll know me from the fact that I've been here. You'll know me from what I've done, not from staring at my face. So there's this image here that I feel is, for me anyway, is captured in this painting, which is that on this lower dimension, the bottom of the canvas, there are these geometric shapes that are frames. And then, but as we get higher up in another dimension, those frames give way. Those frames give way to something that's far more dynamic. So that's one aspect of what's fascinating me about this opening part of our Torah portion. The other part that's fascinating to me is where Moses is supposed to stand in order to have this experience of the presence of God. The end of what we've just read says, stand yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes by, I will place you in a cleft of the rock. And then you'll know me. You'll see my back. So this word that's used for cleft in our Torah portion, nikara, comes from the verb nakar, which means to hollow out. So where Moses needs to be in order to have an appreciation from God is some dimension of his reality that is hollowed out. Okay? There's an interesting connection that Midrash makes between this experience of Moses and encountering God, and that of another character later on in the Jewish Bible who also encounters God. And we read that story in the first book of Kings, which is also a number 1 on your study sheet. I'll share that with you. Then he, Elijah, went into a cave, and there he spent the night. Come out, God called, and stand on the mountain before God. And God passed by. There was a great and mighty wind, splitting the mountains and shattering rocks by the power of God. But God was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake. After the earthquake, fire. But God was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still, small voice. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his mantle about his face and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave.
Amen.
So first, before we get into some of the interesting Hebrew that's embedded in this, that ties it midrashically to the portion we just read about Moses, just want to make sure we all remember the context of Elijah's story. Elijah has ended up at this cave right after he has engaged in this confrontation with the priests of Baal. And Elijah has engaged in this competition, if you will, to see who's able to seek the resources of their respective God. And first, the priests of Baal take this wood and they pray and they pray and they pray to their God for the wood to catch on fire, and it doesn't work. And then Elijah steps forward and he acts somewhat, well, you can imagine some of the fighters that you can see in professional boxing or mixed martial arts matches. They become quite cocky about all this. They really start to pump themselves up. And Elijah does something similar. He looks at the wood and he says, tell you what, I'm gonna make this even, I'm gonna show you how great I am and how great my God is. Pour some water all over that wood. Go ahead, pour water on it. And I'm still gonna be able to set it on fire. And so they do that, they pour water on the wood, and then Elijah prays to God and the wood catches on fire. And then there's a terrible physical confrontation that breaks out, and there's a lot of killing, and eventually Elijah has to flee, and he flees to this mountain. And God says, why are you here? And Elijah says, I'm so passionate for you. That's my purpose in life. And so what happens is God pours out all this dynamic, passionate, if you will, expressions of God's self. Wind and earthquakes and fire, but that's not apparently where God really is. God is in something that's still and small and quiet, and that's what Elijah becomes aware of. So the word that's used here for cave is ma'ara, and that comes from the Hebrew verb arar, which means to strip oneself. And we have an adjective built upon that same root, ara'ah, which means destitute. So there's something in this story that's telling us, in order for Elijah to have this experience with God, he has to be in a place that is destitute. He has to be in a dimension where he has stripped himself down to his bare essence, if you will. And so Midrash says, you know, this place, this cave that Elijah was in order to experience, or this dimension that Elijah was in order to experience God, that's the same dimension that Moses was in to experience the presence of God. Both of these dimensions, the cave, the cleft in the story of Moses, the cave in the story of Elijah, both use words that have to do with a sense of diminishment, a sense of the hollowing out, a sense of stripping oneself down. that's the place from which these two leaders of the Jewish people are able to encounter God. So I'd like to take that and see if we can spend just a few moments connecting that to where we are in our holiday season and the holiday of Sukkot. So if you have the study sheet, you can turn it over. As with every holiday, our early rabbis instructed us not only to read specific verses out of Torah, as I said, for each one of these holidays, there's a special book that in the Jewish Bible that you're to read. So for the holiday of Sukkot, the special book that we're to read is Ecclesiastes, which seems at first blush like an odd book to read during the festival of Sukkot. Festival of Sukkot, first of all, is a harvest festival. We're celebrating all the wonderful food that we're gathering in. And it's also odd because Sukkot is called Hahag, the festival of festival. It's the most joyous of all the festivals. In fact, we are instructed to celebrate with joy this festival of Sukkot. And when you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, it seems that it's a rather depressing book. Its message seems to be nothing that you do matters. No matter how hard you work, it's futile. No matter all the wealth that you gather, it's meaningless. In fact, the rather famous translation of the opening up of the book of Ecclesiastes, which here is presented here, number 2, Chaval Chavalim Sekohelet. Chaval Chavalim, all is Chaval. What profit is there for a human being in all his labors that he toils for under the sun? And in one of the classic translations, that word Chaval Chavalim is translated as vanity. Vanity, vanities, all is vanity. What profit is there for a human being in all his labors? So that's rather strange. That makes it sound like a rather cynical approach to life. So this is where translation makes a big difference. The word chaval that's there in the Hebrew, the literal translation of that is really mist. And so a lot of the more, I would say, true to the Hebrew interpreters have rendered it to give it that nuance. So for example, Rabbi Rami Shapiro has translated the book of Ecclesiastes, and he renders the word chaval as empty, emptiness, emptiness, all is emptiness. And he brings to his translation his background as a practicing Buddhist for several decades, where the notion of illusion and that which is intangible, that this reality is not the true reality. Okay? Then Robert Alter, another great translator, translates the word chaval chavalim as mere breath, which is really close to the meaning of the Hebrew. A breath, a mere breath, all is but a mere breath. So this notion about that what Ecclesiastes is really trying to teach us to do during Sukkot is we're supposed to, if you will, disrobe ourselves of all the psychological, emotional embroidery that we have weighed ourselves down with to protect ourselves from the world. We're to shed all that. We're to become very vulnerable. And then we're to make a shelter and to go live in a fragile shelter temporarily, and to expose ourselves to the elements in order to realize that when we expose ourselves to nature, that we learn something about what's truly of worth. what's truly of value. Not all the fancy cars that we bought, not all the fancy homes that we bought, not all the fancy titles that we've gotten, but we learn something about what's really basically of worth in this world. So Rabbi Jonathan Sachs says it quite beautifully in a little bit of a drush he gave several years ago, and that's in number 3 in your study sheet. Of all the things people have chosen to worship, the self is the least fulfilling. A culture of narcissism quickly gives way to loneliness and despair. Sukkot is a time when we briefly liberate ourselves from the sophisticated pleasures of the city and the processed artifacts of a technological age, and recapture some of the innocence we had when we were young, when the world still had the radiance of wonder. Sukkot is a harvest festival. It's a harvesting on several different levels. At its most basic and most literal, of course, it's a harvesting that's an agricultural dimension, a harvesting of the food that's been planted. But there's also a harvesting of what we've planted in our spiritual and psychological lives. We gather that in, and we realize those are the things that sustain us on a personal level, in addition to the food that we've raised. And what's important, our tradition tells us, is that when you realize the great blessings that we have, those things that sustain us, both on the material level and the spiritual and psychological level, that what's important to do with all of that harvest is to share it. Maimonides articulates it as an ethic, and that's in number 4. While eating and drinking oneself, one is obligated to feed the stranger, orphan, and widow, along with all the unfortunate poor. One who does not is not enjoying a mitzvah, but rather one's stomach. There is, in the great Kabbalistic piece of literature, the Zohar, takes all of this notion and says that when we shed ourself, as experienced through the ritual of the sukkah, that when we do that, we have the power to bring into our lives spiritual presences. And in fact, the Zohar says that when we build a sukkah, when we expose ourselves that in this way, when we make ourselves vulnerable, that what happens is we are visited by 7 spiritual presences in particular, that of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Aaron, and David. However, the Zohar says, if we don't share what we have with others, then those presences will flee and won't stay with us. So this notion of seeking to have, to access these spiritual presences is really what Moses was seeking in the verses that we read. He wanted access to something. He wanted access to the power of the universe that was commissioning him to do this wonderful thing, this act of liberation. And at first, he was treating it in the way that we normally treat things, as I want to possess it. I want to know it. I want to be able to contain it. I want to be able to define it. I want to capture it. And God says, that's not how this is going to work. You have to hollow yourself out. You have to be in a hollowed out place in order to experience. You have to humble yourself. And what you'll experience my presence, but you'll understand me, not as someone that you can capture, but as someone you can learn from. by seeing the goodness that I can do. And so on this holiday of Sukkot, I hope that all of us are able to seek this moment of being hollowed out, of being stripped bare, of being able to create a space within our lives where we can welcome others into our lives and share the great harvest of our ethics, of our spirituality, of our psychological development, as well as whatever material wealth we may have. When we share that, we expand the spiritual presences in our lives as well. So with that, I'd love to hear thoughts and reflections that you've had as we've been reading our Torah portion this week. If you'd like to raise your hand, I would so love to call on you. Anna.
I'm just gonna scoot over here to get so you can hear me. You're talking about sharing Torah and having a quiet place, and I kept thinking about wanting to see God's face, panim, pay, word, letter, pay, face, lips, mouth, right? Pay. But inside of the letter pay, when it's written in the Beit Yosef script, is a hidden another letter of Torah. And the letter of Torah that hides inside of the pay, which represents the mouth or oral Torah, is the letter bet. You look at it really close sometime and you'll just see the bet just sitting right in there. Now, bet is what begins Bereshit. It's about beginnings and things, but bet also signifies a shelter. It makes a little hut, like a sukkah. A bet has 3 sides with 1 side open. It's a little place where you can go, right? So I think I've said before, and I want to repeat, because this is really bears repeating. It is a much, much, much greater physical handicap to be deaf than it is to be blind. A person who is born deaf has a really much more difficult time in the world. So when you think about hearing and seeing, Moses wants to see God, and God says, no, 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 no. Why don't you just try hearing the small voice, using that other sense, which is so much more actually really valuable. Anything else? Yes, the sukkah, being this empty bet space that we can go into, is a really good space to be together with our friends and our ancestors and our stranger friends, or strangers. Susan and David, I know you invite people in off the street. That's good. So we can share Torah with our mouths, with the people around us, oral Torah. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
I think that was about it.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Jay, go ahead and unmute and share with us.
I have a procedural question, Rabbi. I was looking in the latest Jewish calendar, and I noticed that this Shabbat does not have a particular Torah portion listed. I don't know if there are any other Shabbats during the year. So when do we actually read the last chapter of Deuteronomy? Is it going to be on Simchat Torah when you read it, or is it next Shabbat? How does this work logistically? It kind of puzzles me that we're very clear to end the reading of Deuteronomy. When does it actually end, and when does Genesis start? And why is there no Torah portion except Sukkot listed in the Jewish calendar for this Shabbat? End of question.
Okay, so we read the end of the concluding portion of Deuteronomy in Simchat Torah, and then immediately begin reading the opening verses of Bereshit. So that's when that gets concluded. Yeah, thank you. Okay. And some of your Bibles or Humashim should have schedules. Mine does, about when you read special portions, especially during the festivals and holidays. So that's a good thing a good resource to look at as well. So thank you, Jay. Okay.
I forgot the last thing I wanted to say. Moses is up there talking to God. I want to see you. By the way, I'd like to see you. We're having a conversation here, right? We are. He's already talking to God. He has that greatest gift, the audible, or what is described as that, and he wants to see. And I think the reason why Moses wanted to see God's face was so that the story could be written down and told to us, so we could learn from it, because he didn't need to. He was already in the room talking.
Thank you. David, David Phillips.
I mean, this may be an ignorant comment, but if I'm reading this Torah portion correctly, Pesach is mentioned, Shavuot is mentioned, but Sukkot is not mentioned. And if that's true, I find it odd.
Dave? All right. Anyone have a comment about that, Susan?
Oh, not about that. I had a different comment.
Okay. Go ahead, Susan.
I just wanted to share that in Robert Alter's notes on his translation, he says, I kind of love this. He said, in response to the request that God show Moses his glory, he offers instead to show him his goodness. Tov.
Nice.
Oh, I like that.
That's nice.
I like
Yeah.
that.
And the other comment that I have, and then that's it, is that I love the art. And when I look at it, I see an upside down heart.
Oh, that's sweet.
That's
I like
very
that.
nice. Thank you. And David, the Feast of Ingathering, David. Feast of Ingathering. Okay. Is mentioned. All right. So
That's Sukkot, is the
yes.
feast of-
So other thoughts, reflections?
I see it.
Sherry? I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
I'm just saying, I see it. Thank you. That's verse
Okay.
20.
Thank you. Sherry?
I was just going to respond to the Jonathan Sachs quote about the radiance of wonder. And to prepare for today, I looked up a little bit of Rachel Carson's Sense of Wonder. And that's what this reminds me of. And I'm wondering if Jonathan Sachs was, in a sense, reading Rachel Carson, because it sounds so similar.
Tell us a little bit more about Rachel Carson.
Well, the mother of the environmental movement. She single-handedly stopped DDT from destroying the earth, essentially, and was a scientist, a gifted writer, and she raised her nephew Roger, because Roger was orphaned, and then of course she died before Roger was even completely grown. But she wrote a book called The Sense of Wonder, and the idea was to teach her little nephew, about the wonder of the universe, and talked about how this was already back in the 1950s, how jaded children were becoming, even in the 50s, away from the natural world. And her idea was to create a template of sorts to help parents to teach that sense of wonder. And so I think about Jonathan Sachs talking about the radiance of wonder. It just reminds me of the writings of Rachel Carson. So
That's lovely. So what you got me to think about was when Rabbi Jonathan Sachs talks about this radiance of wonder, it comes from our return to a certain childlike wonder at the world, right? And we have let go of our sense of our arrogance or our sense of self-importance. And if you will, some people think that the high holy days, the Yamim Noraim, comes to a conclusion with Yom Kippur. And then we break the fast and everything's over and we just go about our normal lives again. But really, the days of awe conclude with Sukkot, because Sukkot, if you will, is a kind of corrective for what can happen even during something that's supposed to be as humbling as Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. sometimes we can walk out of a holy day saying, wow, we really did a lot there. We went through the month of Elul. We were thinking about things. We were getting ready for the high holy days. We went to Rosh Hashanah. We showed up for services, and then we blew the shofar, and then we have Yom Kippur, and we fast for a day, and we have a whole day long of services. Boy, were we great or what? We really accomplished a lot. And so it is as if we immediately return to a sense of our self-importance, maybe even a little bit of arrogance. And so quickly, we're able to return to our sense of controlling the world. And Sukkot is supposed to be a corrective to that. It's supposed to be a kind of humbling of the self. And it's what Elijah and Moses here are experiencing, that if you want to experience God really, you have to hollow yourself out. You have to strip yourself down bare. You have to expose yourself, become vulnerable, and appreciate that the world is not built upon our sense of control and arrogance and capture. It's based upon our sense of integration into creation. Okay.
I'm going to pop in one more time.
Okay.
Nothing is so humbling as building a sukkah with a ball of twine and some crooked limbs,
Okay.
which is what we did this year, but we accomplished it because we had a lot of help.
Nice.
And I couldn't remember, I thought I knew how to lash, but it's actually been about 58 years. And finally, finally we got it.
Who helped you build your sukkah?
Pardon?
Who helped you build your sukkah this year?
Well, my daughter and my two grandsons helped hold some of the poles still while I climbed the ladder or knelt down. And then the next day, Rabbi got out there and did his part.
Thank you. Richard.
Yes, the notion of Rachel Carlson got me thinking.
A little louder.
The notion about Rachel Carlson got me thinking, and about Moses there wanting to see the face. There's two things there. One is that, no, you don't see the face of God because he's not separate from you. It's not a separate, you're part of this deal here, okay? He's already inside you, and you want to set it up as another being. No. That's your character armor that's doing that. Get rid of your character armor. And the other thing is, I was told as a child that, the whole world is full of God's glory. And I was told, no. The whole world is the fullness of his glory. So when you see his back, what you're seeing is he talks about his garment, his robe. His robe is sweeping out across the landscape. So when you look at the landscape and flowers are popping up, that's God moving off. And that should be the wonder every time you look at nature. And that's what he's telling us. You just look out there and you'll see what I'm doing. And the other thing I had was on 34:7, extending kindness to the 1000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression. He does not remit all punishment, but visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children. And didn't we read somewhere else that the kids aren't responsible for what their fathers did?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a different twist?
What do you think?
Well, it makes sense when he said, you're going to go in there and you're going to forget me all about me, but later on, years later, you'll get to the point. And we keep getting the same stuff come at us in this world. We've got climate change, we've got wars, we've got all this stuff going on with leaders at each other. And is this a result of the iniquity of our founding fathers?
Mm.
I'm just saying this is a different thing than I was told as a kid. Somewhere else in here is, oh, don't worry about it. Kids aren't responsible for what the folks did. Then how come we have to deal with the crap they left?
Bear the consequences of it. Okay, thank you.
Is that what visiting the iniquity on the fathers on the children? So we're dealing with the consequences, but it's not our punishment.
Right.
I'm going with the extended kindness.
Okay. All right, so let me thank you. Let me call upon Paul. Go ahead. You've got your hand up there.
Yeah. There was quite a bit of fanfare and no discussion about the face of God and the words. There's a lot of words when you're discussing the face, But then there's a ... and then they throw in, so I was pretty satisfied with about that. But all of a sudden, there's an afterthought about, hey, see my back. Well, and no explanations, and it's up to us to figure out what that means, and then it's free for all. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts. What do you, why put it there at all? And since he did put it there, what does it mean?
Well, I think Richard put it beautifully. We talked about the robe of God's presence sweeping across, and you can see the beauty of nature. You can witness the acts of creation that the source of all life generates. So I think the notion that one gets to know a person really by watching their behavior, more than trying to start out by looking into them and trying to discern their intention. That when you watch someone's behavior, then you can draw some inferences about who they are and what their intentions are and so forth, right?
God renews creation daily. Look out the window.
Yeah.
So
Well healed.
thank you for your question. Thank you for jumping with some thoughts as well, everyone. All right, and other thoughts, reflections that people would like to share. Okay. Go ahead, Sherry.
I just wanted to open this up for discussion.
And a little louder, be great.
Just to open this up for discussion about the culture of narcissism. There have been a lot of books written lately about our culture of narcissism and gives way to loneliness and despair. And I was thinking about that in what you were talking about, appearing in the Sukkot after the high holidays, and where that's almost like a corrective emotional experience going into the Sukkah from the high holy days. And if I understood you correctly, you talked about it. I would characterize it as that perhaps that there's a tendency after the high holy days to enter the Sukkah with a sense of narcissism of a sort, because you've been focusing so much on yourself and whatever deeds or misdeeds or whatever it is, but it still leaves one, somewhat lonely and despairing. And then going into the Sukkah for a celebration, but it's a celebration is it a corrective emotional experience in a way?
So here's what you got to think about. It's so beautiful. The final, we do a lot of biblical readings from the start of Rosh Hashanah to the end of Yom Kippur. And the final biblical reading that we do on Yom Kippur is the story of Jonah. And Jonah is this character who seeks to flee from the responsibilities that God charges him with to help improve the lives of others. And Jonah doesn't want anything to do with that. And what he does, he flees. And then he seeks to, once everyone gets better, once people say, right, we want to repent, Jonah says, that's exactly what I was afraid of. And he has this kind of ideological purity, or this sense of hyper partisanship, or that he doesn't want others to join in on this. And he's got this sense of ultra self-righteousness, which alienates him from the very mission that he's supposed to be on, which is to be with others and to see that others lead a good life as well. So Jonah is this cautionary tale about what it means to become so self-righteous that you become arrogant, and you become dismissive of others, and you become, like Jonah was, completely alienated. He at the end of the story, he's left alone. And God says, don't you think I should worry about all those people?
And so many cattle.
And so many cattle too. Yeah, and Jonah has no answer. He doesn't comprehend what that's all about. He's still so stuck in his sense of self-righteousness. So that's what the rabbis are trying to tell us by the end of Yom Kippur. Just because you've gone through Rosh Hashanah, just because you've gone through fasting, just because you've gone through 25 hours of deep prayer, don't think you're so hot, right? So in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you out into this booth. I'm going to get you out of the fortification of your home. And I'm going to send you out into this booth so you can think about this for a week. And you can realize that the only way to experience love is to become vulnerable. That the only way that you can experience presence of life is to invite that life into your embrace. So, and that's the way I think of Sukkot as being kind of corrective to sometimes the self-righteous arrogance that we can have after having gone through all this, all these rituals, and thinking that we've kind of set everything straight and we can now just go back to our normal lives.
And the sukkah is a communal experience as opposed to a solitary experience with the holidays that precede it.
So right, so that's what the Zohar is saying. It says, if all you do is you go into all you do is build a sukkah and you sit in it, you're going to become more impoverished than you were before. The only way to become rich is to bring people into it and share what you have. That's how you become rich.
You see, on the high holy days, we sit with the Torahs, as many as our synagogue can have, and we read from them, and we have all the written Torah. And when Sukkot comes, it's time for the oral Torah. We sit and we share with each other.
Nice, thank you, thank you. So, and then any other thoughts, reflections? So with that, I hope that everyone is able to be welcomed by someone else, that you will welcome someone else into your life, that you will find some way to share yourself with others, because those are the building blocks of a true sukkah. There's a sense of leading a life of sacred purpose and of generous neighborliness. And with that, I wish you all a good holiday, Hag Sameach, and thank you all so much for gathering together. You inspire me so much. Thank you all. God bless you. Be well.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Bye.
Yeah.